a topic that I think a lot of leaders actually face, which is what do you do when your team resists strategic changes that you know your organization needs to make?
Yeah, we've seen this happen a lot, right? We recently worked with a client who they saw this at the middle management level. And so there were strategic changes that had to happen. We're talking survival level organizational change that was necessary. And yet middle management resisted the change and in fact even sabotaged it at some point.
Yeah. And I think it happens often because as leaders, you tend to have different perspective. You might be facing pressures that your team is not aware of. You probably have access to information that your team don't have access to. So it's natural for a disconnect to happen. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Right. It is possible to overcome this.
In 4 easy steps, actually. They're not easy, but I think just knowing that there are things that you can do as a leader to influence the buy-in that your team has to lean into change is helpful, right? So
what's the first step?
The first step is listen actively. I think sometimes when leaders sense this resistance from their teams, they shut that down. They're trying to rah the change. They're trying to champion it, right? They don't want anyone kind of voicing concerns or anything that might detract from a positive view on the change. And I think that's a mistake. So the best thing that a leader can do to start is listen actively. Make sure that you're inviting an opportunity for conversation. More than one. This isn't something that can be done in a half an hour. But give your staff, give your team a chance to ask questions, voice concerns, say what's on their mind, and allow multiple opportunities for them to do that. Because I think once they get a chance to air it, and you acknowledge that you've heard it, that starts to build that foundation of trust that's really necessary for change to happen.
I love what you said about the fear of having too many concern or negative feelings or opinions about the change because it might detract from the change. What happens when you don't give space for that to happen openly, it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It just happened underground and you can't see it, and then it end up actually hurting you and hurting the change that you're trying to enforce or implement further down the road.
Absolutely.
So it's going to pop up one way or another. You can't avoid it. So you might as well just open the door, let it come in, welcome it in, have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that a lot of leaders that we've supported are concerned about doing this is they're like, that's going to take so much time. We spend all of this time, reviewing and observing and looking to identify what needs to be changed. We have spent 6 months to a year doing this. And now that we've identified what needs to change, we need to go now.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you as a leadership team have had about 6 months to a year soaking in this information, processing this. And so, of course, you're 2 steps ahead of your team and you're ready to go, but they're not there. So you need to slow down. I know this is hard to hear when you're facing pressure from your board or other leaders above you. But if you don't give this time, it's going to cost you time down the road, right? Because the implementation is not going to go smoothly and you're going to end up having to extend the time anyway. So might as well be intentional about it and take some time to have some real conversation from the start.
Exactly. Once you've done that, then you can move on to the step 2, which is to bridge that gap that you mentioned, right? So if you're a leader who's had time to process this change, you really understand the rationale, and now you've invited your team to talk about where they're at, you need to bridge that gap and you've got intel into where they're at. So how do you do that? Well, some of the things you can do is you can actually listen to them voice whatever the challenges are. What are their true challenges that they might be experiencing right now? And how might this change actually benefit them from where they are right now? So you can listen to those things and make sure you communicate that back to them when you're explaining the entire purpose of this change.
Yeah, use the language, right? It's really powerful when you can use the same word that your team used to describe their challenges and their concern to frame the change and why it's beneficial. The other thing is when you're listening to your team concern, think about why are they concerned about that? Is there information that they don't have? Is there a piece of the puzzle, a piece of the picture that they don't understand? So how can you help them gain that piece of information so that they can see, right? Because I think a lot of time what I'm seeing is that leaders shouldn't worry about that because of this. assuming that the
actually
team
know.
actually knows that piece of information, but they don't, right?
Exactly.
So just trying to think about that in terms of what information can you communicate. And sometimes leaders think they communicate something once and that's done.
Yeah, that's true, and it's not true.
Yeah, you need to repeat it. Sometimes you need to repeat it in a different way. I mean, it's the same as teaching, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to bridge, you're trying to fill in a gap in understanding. Sometimes it just take multiple time of reinforcing the message, of saying it in a different way, of sharing it in different format in order for it to soak in for the team.
Exactly. And so then, where do we go from here? We co-create a plan, right? So this is moving from the idea of change into the change actually happening. Most leaders tend to just kind of forge straight into developing the plan. And it's almost like a leader takes it on as their job and their job alone to figure out, okay, how are we going to get there, as opposed to engaging the team in the process, right? Which I think can cause major headaches, because for a few reasons. The team probably knows things from their perspective that a leader might not. Very real impacts that might affect their day-to-day in terms of how the change is implemented. If a leader leans into that and actually engages them in the process, the plan will be even better, right? Because it'll be a lot more relevant and it'll take all of those things into account. And then the other piece is buy-in. I mean, if you're part of creating something, you're much more likely to support it. You're much more likely to be engaged in helping it succeed.
And I think this is the part where leaders usually don't know when to let the team into the process. And the space between the ideation and implementation is a really perfect opportunity for your team to come in and support you and move it from you as the champion of the change to the whole team as the champion of the change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that part of a good plan is being really clear on expectations and responsibilities, right? So like not only engaging your team in the development of the plan, but also being really explicit and clear about how they're expected to participate in implementing the plan. Because most often in a time of change, people seek clarity more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think that takes a lot of pressure off the leader. When you're trying to implement change, it doesn't really matter how good you are, how much experience, how much knowledge you have of your business, you still can't foresee everything. When you bring the team into the implementation, co-creating the path, it takes that pressure away, because you can come to the team and say, you know, this is where I know we need to go. It's natural for where we are in terms of we're going to have more questions than answer. And you're going to be part of coming up with the answer. And you might even be part of identifying what's the right question to ask. What question need to be answered in order to ensure a successful implementation of the change. So
absolutely. And then last but not least, I think once you have that plan in place that you've co-created, it's not done. The most important part of implementing any change is to remain flexible, because the world's dynamic, things will change again, right? So how can you make sure as a leader that you're continually checking in on progress and adapting the plan to implement the change wherever needed? Kind of a part of ongoing conversation with your team is so critical, so it stays live and relevant, right?
Yeah, I think this is the biggest complaint that we hear from teams of their frustration is usually we kick things off with a big bang and then things fizzle out because we don't do enough follow-up. There isn't enough of let's do a check-in 6 months from now, or let's do a check-in every quarter to see what's going well, what is working out the way that we had anticipated it to, and what's not, and therefore what need to be adjusted. That's that's an important part of any implementation plan, because you can't anticipate everything. And so it's important to be flexible and not get stuck on a plan that's no longer serving the purpose that you had originally.
Very true.
So there you have it. 4 steps. Listen actively, bridge the gap of information, co-create a path forward, and then be flexible and reflect frequently. Okay,
that's it.
We hope that's helpful. Make sure to subscribe if you want more conversation like this.